neighbors, it's Brad here from eTrailer, and today on our 2024 Ford Transit T250, we are taking a look at some suspension enhancement, and specifically the SumoSprings Solo Custom rear helpers. These are going to be jounce bumper replacements that you can put on your Transit to really help out with sag. It's going to help out with a lot of different things, not just sagging suspension, but all the things that are kind of associated with that. Now today we have 3 different ones, and they're all going to install exactly the same. The only difference between the different colors is going to be the capacity that you choose. And so, if you wanted a specific color, it really comes down to what that capacity is, not which one's going to look the best. And let's break these down. So on our first side over here, we have a 1,000-pound capacity. So what does that mean? Well, when it comes to capacity, it's not necessarily going to give you added capacity. It's more or less, what are you going to actively have loaded? So whether it be payload inside the back of here, or if you're pulling a trailer, that would come down to tongue weight. But adjusting it properly for your need is going to be the most important thing, because if you go too stiff on something that's not really loaded down, every time it makes contact, whether over a bump or hitting a transition in the highway, it's going to be a lot more harsh than it should be. And vice versa, if you've ever towed anything overloaded, you're really going to feel that it's just kind of dragging. And that's where these really come into play. Filling up that void means that it really can't compress that all the way down like a factory jounce bumper. It's going to fill that void, so the rear is going to stay a little bit tougher feeling, and it's just going to make it seem like it can handle that load a lot better. And again, prevent your suspension from prematurely wearing out, because as the shock is compressed, when you compress a shock and you hit bumps, it really creates a lot of heat, whereas normal stroke of a shock allows for a lot of that movement. So this will again push those shocks back up so they can get a little bit full stroke. And these are progressive, so meaning as you put pressure on them, they're going to fight back, but as you put more pressure, it'll compound, and from there really start to fight against all of that weight. With that being said, we covered the capacities. They're all going to show up with the exact same hardware and spacers included. So let's take a look at that. We have a block here. This will be required on all of these, and these just create a nice, solid mounting point against the frame, and they do give you the bolts to be able to bolt that up, as well as Loctite, which is really nice too. They give you everything you need. Now, you may see these longer bolts and go, well, what are those for? That's going to be if you have suspension that's a little bit higher. Sometimes there's a larger void, and these spacers will come into play where you can get either 1 inch or a 1/2 inch, or combined, you can get 1.5 inches to close up that void. And again, what we're trying to do here is close that gap between the axle and frame to really reduce that sag, and that's where those spacers may come in handy. Now, it's very possible when you go to install these that you don't need these, and that's totally fine as well, but they at least include them, which is really, really nice. So with that all being said, let's get these installed. Again, the way that I install one of these is going to be identical to the other one. So let's get underneath here and get these put in place. Now, if you take a look at the instruction manual, they'll say that you may need to raise up your vehicle. And sometimes that's the case, and really that's just to open this up to be able to get everything in place. But we may or may not have to do that. If that is the case, make sure you chalk your front wheels, and you can use a floor jack to raise up on the hitch or the frame to get this to open up. But before we do anything, here's our factory jounce bumper. And as I talked about that void, here's a couple inches of basically gap here, and this would have to drop down with weight before making contact, before this bottoms out, and it's still going to compress. This is actually softer than the SumoSprings, so even once it's compressed, this can really squish down quite a bit, and all of this here is going to translate to, all of this in our wheel well being the tire closer to the fender. So again, filling this up with a new SumoSpring is really going to make sure that this engages quicker and we don't really have a chance to sag. So step 1 is going to be removing our factory jounce bumper. Pretty easy on these. A lot of times you can just grab a hold of it, twist it, and it'll pop out pretty simple. If you are struggling with it, soapy water helps, or you can grab a screwdriver, put it in there, and pry it off. But you can see, pretty simple for our case here. Now, this cup that held on to the jounce bumper, we're also going to need to remove. And it looks like on here that's maybe a 13mm bolt. So let me grab a socket and we'll get this removed. Now when you see these together, now granted this had the cup that it popped into, but height-wise we're gaining, I would say, a little bit over an inch, but body-wise this is pretty small. It's pretty tiny, and again, it's kind of a similar shape to where this is going to be progressive as well, but one of these is going to fight a little bit better against weight, and I'll give you a hint, probably going to be this one. So what they say to do is measure the gap. I like to wait until the jounce bumper's off. This will really give you a good idea as to which spacers you may or may not have to use. And the way I'll do that is we know we need to use this block to bolt it up. So I'll grab my Sumo and that spacer there and hold it up like I'd be mounting it. Now, what we're looking for is about a 1/2 inch to an inch right here to where the bottom of our Sumo spring should sit. So in our case, I'm going to definitely grab our 1-inch spacer and take a look at that first. That's pretty close, but I think if we put both spacers for that 1.5 inches, that puts us right where we need to be. So yours may be different. Again, if your suspension's worn out, it may sit a little bit lower, whatever it may be. But you are going to be looking for just about a finger's width, give or take a little bit. So in our case, we'll be using the whole kit. Now that we determined what spacers we're going to be using in our application, you may be wondering, well, are the other capacities going to be different heights? And no, they aren't. So again, it's going to come down to your vehicle. If you have it loaded up, that's going to determine the gap, not necessarily the capacities here. But knowing that we're going to be using all the spacers, you can open up your hardware kit. We're going to be using the longer bolts. We're going to grab our flat washer here, and we're going to feed this through the large opening. And just kind of drop this. The washer is about the same diameter, but it's pretty flexible here. So just push this through, and maybe a little tricky to guide this in, but you can see the bolt head, and once we get it right where we need it, we can push that through. With the bolt all the way passed through, we're going to grab our 4-inch wide plate. That'll go first. And then in the instructions, it's kind of not super clear as to the orientation, but from what I've gathered of doing these installs previous, I'm going to use our 1-inch spacer first. That way it has pressure against this plate. And then our smaller 1/2 inch, this is about the width of the frame. So that seems to make the most sense to me. And this will leave enough of that thread to be able to bolt up into the frame. But before we do that, we do want to get some Loctite on our threads. And that way when we tighten this all down, it's not going to wiggle loose. Generally, it really doesn't have a place to do that anyway once it's compressed. But again, just a little added protection there. Now, this is where it may become required to raise up the rear of the vehicle, because in order to get this all tightened down, you're going to need a 17mm socket. And I have a deep well here, and I'm probably going to need a 3-inch extension to be able to raise this up and tighten it down into the frame. But the problem is, as we saw that gap, it may not be big enough for a ratchet, an extension, and this socket. So in order to raise this up, I'm on a lift. I'm going to be grabbing a trans jack, but at this point, you can grab a floor jack to raise up, to open up that window for us to get this all tightened down. Now all we need to do is raise this up, and we're going to be bolting this up to that factory spot where our factory jounce bumper came off. So get your thread lock on there. And one of the issues that can happen, it's kind of minor, but it can be annoying, is when I go to raise this up, that deep well socket, this bolt can push back down, and then you're just spinning and it's not going to thread. So if you're running into that issue, first make sure that the bolt is all the way passed through, get your socket on there, and what I like to do is push on the spacers. And that's just going to put side pressure on that bolt, so it's going to stay in place. So if you can hold on to that and then get a few threads started, once it's started, you're not going to have any issues. So I'll raise this up, again, holding pressure on my spacer here. Now, once that's snugged down, we do need to come back with the torque wrench. And what we'll do is we'll grab our ratchet and then get this taken off our extension. And you can leave the extension up there. We'll grab our torque wrench, and the settings are going to be found in the instruction manual. It's pretty low torque setting, so 3/8 torque wrench should work just fine. And if you need a torque wrench, you can get them here at eTrailer, but generally you can go to an auto parts store and rent one for free. And really all you'll need to do is torque down each side once you have them installed, and you'll be done with it. So we'll go through this and we'll get it torqued down real quick. All right, and then to get this all out, we'll separate again our extension. It's pretty tight here. If you needed to raise up that suspension a little bit more, you could, but these are flexible. So if you have to pry this out, don't be surprised. Like I said, you could raise it up a little bit more to gain the larger gap to slide that out easily, but if you're stuck and you're worried that they're going to be permanently in there, no, you can bend them out of the way, not a problem. So you'll see that our gap is quite large here. That's because we have the trans jack. So I'll lower this down and see what that gap looks like. And with the vehicle lowered down, eventually the suspension will probably settle after hitting a few bumps, but you can see this is what we're looking for. And compared to the gap that we had previous, I think it's going to be a lot better. And just the fact that it's a thicker body and be able to fight that sag quite a bit more, I think you're going to be really happy with really any of the capacities that you go with, assuming you choose the right one for your vehicle. So with this one installed, all you need to do to get the rest of it installed is just copy paste for the other side and you're done. So super simple, as you can see, and a great way to really enhance your towing and just ride quality overall. Now, hopefully this video was helpful in deciding if SumoSprings are going to be right for you, which capacity you're going to get, and then also how to install it. But throughout the process, if you still have any questions or maybe some feedback on the video that can make it a little bit better for neighbors like you deciding, feel free to leave it in the comments. Our goal is to make videos as best as possible for neighbors like you to get the right products and be able to install it. So with that being said, thank you for joining us for a look and installation of the SumoSprings Solo Springs on a 2024 Ford Transit T250.